In the vast embrace of the Andes, where clouds dissolve into mountain peaks and the earth seems to breathe with ancient memory, stand monuments that refuse to surrender their secrets, not monuments to kings or conquerors, but to something far more mysterious, a profound understanding of the world that modern civilization has somehow forgotten. The stones speak, but we have lost the language. These are not stories of what we know, they are chronicles of what we do not. Of civilizations that understood principles we are only now beginning to rediscover. Of engineering so precise that it makes our contemporary technology seem crude by comparison. Of spiritual knowledge woven so intricately with mathematical precision that we cannot tell where science ends and faith begins. The question that haunts every archaeologist, every engineer, every scholar who ventures into these sacred valleys is not simply how these monuments were built. It is something far deeper. Why were they built with such impossible care? What drove an ancient people to invest generations in creating structures that could only be fully appreciated by future generations they would never meet? What knowledge did they possess that demanded such expression? On the vast tan canvas of the Peruvian coastal plain, a remarkable dialogue exists between earth and sky. The Nazca region, a place of profound aridity where moisture arrives as a whisper rather than a torrent, holds within its dust and gravel a library written in a language that speaks only to those who look downward from above. These are not mere decorations scratched into the desert. They are statements of extraordinary confidence, declarations that the makers understood geometry, proportion, and spatial relationships with an acuity that forces modern engineers to reconsider what they thought they knew about ancient capability. The region itself is a paradox of preservation. Rainfall, when it arrives at all, comes in such minimal quantities that the desert floor undergoes almost no transformation. The dark stones remain undisturbed for centuries, the pale earth beneath them equally constant. Time moves differently here, as if the land itself has negotiated a truce with decay. Within this frozen landscape, over 450 kilometers of deliberately created lines traverse the terrain. The people of the Nazca culture, who thrived in this harsh region between 200 years before the Common Era and 600 years after, left behind geometric designs of staggering scale. Straight lines that extend for more than 10 kilometers without deviation, triangular shapes occupying areas larger than modern towns, spiral formations that seem to pull the eye inward towards some distant center. But the true artistry lies in the zoomorphic designs, the animal forms that cover the desert floor. A monkey rendered with a tail spiraling outward, the curve of its tail containing proportions that suggest deep mathematical understanding. A hummingbird captured in flight, its wings precisely angled as if the artist had somehow frozen motion itself. A spider with legs so delicate that each one could barely support a grain of sand, yet rendered with unmistakable clarity. A whale, a killer whale, lizards coiling across the earth, human-like figures with proportions that seem deliberate rather than accidental. What distinguishes these creations from simple artistic expression is their scale and precision. Some were drawn, it appears, in single continuous strokes, as if created by a hand guided by a mind that had already visualized the entire figure in 3 dimensions before beginning. The technical achievement this represents cannot be overstated. The Nazca people possessed no wheels, they had no advanced metal tools. They worked in an environment where visibility was limited, where the curvature of the earth and the elevation of viewing points made seeing an entire figure simultaneously nearly impossible from ground level. Yet they created designs that align with perfect accuracy. Modern attempts to recreate even a fraction of these figures using contemporary surveying equipment have revealed something humbling. The original designs are more precise than the reproductions. The symmetry is more absolute. The curves are more consistent. The geometric relationships more harmonious. How was this achieved? The prevailing theory suggests a system of ropes and stakes, a kind of permanent grid that allowed the artists to scale up smaller designs to monumental proportions. At each intersection, a stake would mark a precise location. A rope stretched between points would indicate the direction. By carefully following these guides, even across terrain that obscures overall perspective, a team of workers could reproduce exact proportions. It is a plausible explanation. It is also, many scholars concede, insufficient to fully account for what was achieved here. The question that persists is not merely technical but philosophical. Why were these designs created in a configuration that could only be fully appreciated from the sky? The Nazca people had no aircraft, they had no balloons, they had no way to ascend high enough to see their creations as we see them now, from the safety of modern flight. Some have speculated that they did not need to see them. The act of creation was the purpose. The alignment of the human body with the earth, the coordination of intention with execution, the marriage of individual effort to collective vision, these were the actual achievements. The designs themselves were communication with the heavens, offerings to deities that could perceive from above what earthbound creators could only imagine. This interpretation finds support in the Nazca belief system. The culture that created these figures worshipped deities associated with water, rain, fertility, and the sky itself. In a region where water is precious beyond measure, where every irrigation channel represents survival, the connection to celestial forces would have been profound. The geometric patterns may have functioned as prayers, physical supplications to the sky gods carved into the earth itself. Other researchers have proposed that these lines served practical purposes lost to us. Astronomical calendars marked in stone and earth, irrigation guides, navigation systems, maps of territories and resources. Each theory has merit. Each remains incomplete. What cannot be disputed is that the Nazca culture invested enormous communal effort into something that demonstrated no immediate practical benefit. They created beauty for an audience they could not see. They made art for gods and for time itself. In doing so, they left a message for all future humans. Your understanding of what is possible is incomplete. The fortress among the stars high in the Cusco region, where the earth itself seems to touch the heavens. A fortress rises with a presence that feels almost defiant. Sacsayhuaman, the name carries weight in Quechua, suggesting a puma of flesh, or perhaps a place of satisfaction, of completion. The fortress sprawls across the mountain like a predator at rest, its massive walls of interlocking stone following the ridgeline, as if the builders understood the very pulse of the mountain. To stand before these walls is to confront a reality that challenges comfortable assumptions about the limits of ancient engineering. Blocks weighing up to 400 tons, heavier than modern aircraft, sit fitted together without mortar, without cement, without any adhesive substance. The precision of these joints suggests that each block was individually shaped to nestle perfectly against its neighbors, as if the stones themselves had been negotiated with rather than dominated. The walls do not appear to have been built through force. They seem instead to have been carefully assembled, as if the builders possessed some insight into the very nature of how stones could be made to coexist. The larger blocks occupy the lower portions of the structure, the load-bearing positions. Smaller stones sit above them, creating a system of graduated weight that somehow distributes force in ways that have allowed these walls to survive numerous earthquakes that would have leveled ordinary structures. The construction technique reveals something about Inca engineering philosophy. Rather than attempting to impose absolute rigidity, the builders created a system of flexibility. The blocks could shift slightly, accommodating movement without breaking. The irregular shapes of each stone meant that seismic energy dissipated across multiple contact points rather than concentrating along single fault lines. This is sophisticated earthquake engineering, the kind that modern science took centuries to develop, now present in structures predating our current understanding by half a millennium. But the true mystery lies not in the visible walls, it lies beneath them. Archaeological surveys have revealed that the lower levels of Sacsayhuaman show construction techniques markedly different from the upper sections. The lowest stones exhibit weathering patterns inconsistent with Inca occupation. The fitting technique is even more precise in these lower levels, suggesting either a remarkable development in Inca engineering over time, or the presence of an earlier, different civilization. The surfaces of these lower stones appear polished in ways that seem almost impossible with bronze tools. Some researchers have suggested that the Inca may have inherited this structure from a previous culture and built upon it, adapting pre-existing foundations for their own purposes. The Inca were not above such reuse. They understood the practical advantages of maintaining already stable structures while adding their own modifications above. If true, this raises a question that extends beyond archaeology. Were there civilizations in the Andean region predating the Inca by centuries or even millennia? Civilizations sophisticated enough to achieve this level of stonework, but not sophisticated enough to leave written records? Or did they choose not to leave records, preferring instead to communicate through monuments? Local legends speak of giants who inhabited the Andes in ancient times, beings capable of moving mountains and shaping stone as if it were clay. Modern dismisses such stories as mythology. But what if they represent distorted memories of a genuinely advanced civilization? What if the giants were simply people with technological knowledge that seemed superhuman when compared to later cultures? Beneath Sacsayhuaman, tunnels extend downward into the mountain. Some scholars believe these lead to chambers. Whether ceremonial, practical, or something else entirely remains unknown. Visitors to the site occasionally report unusual magnetic effects. Compasses behave erratically. Electronic devices malfunction without obvious cause. Animals display signs of stress in certain areas. These phenomena could easily be explained by local geology, unusual mineral deposits, naturally occurring magnetic anomalies. Yet they persist in witness accounts across decades, suggesting that something about the site's electromagnetic properties remains genuinely anomalous. The Inca regarded Sacsayhuaman as a power center, a place where the energy of the earth itself could be felt and channeled. Modern people who visit report feeling something intangible at the site. An electric tingling. A sense of presence. An awareness that they stand in a place suffused with intention and ancient purpose. Whether this is genuine perception of actual energy phenomena or psychological response to standing before structures that inspire awe remains open to interpretation. But the consistency of such reports across different visitors, different cultures, and different time periods suggests that something real occurs at this location, something that transcends simple architectural appreciation. The city that learned from water in the fertile valleys where rivers flow from the Andes toward the coast, the Norte Chico civilization created something extraordinary. Corral, discovered and excavated in recent decades, represents one of the earliest complex urban centers in all of human civilization. Dating to approximately 2,600 years before the Common Era, it emerged at roughly the same time as the earliest Egyptian pyramids. What distinguishes Cairo from its contemporary civilizations is not the presence of monumental architecture, though the pyramids here are remarkable achievements. It is the absence of certain things that we assume fundamental to civilization. No writings have been discovered at Corral. No hieroglyphics, no inscriptions, no ceramic decorations bearing symbols that might represent language. The Egyptians left behind written records. The Sumerians recorded their history in cuneiform. The Indus Valley civilization developed a script whose meaning we still struggle to decipher. Corral left no such legacy, yet it was unquestionably a sophisticated urban center. Thousands of people lived in organized neighborhoods. Complex irrigation systems brought water from the Sup River. Multiple pyramidal structures served ceremonial and possibly administrative functions. The city exhibited evidence of careful urban planning, with streets and plazas arranged according to clear design principles. No weapons have been recovered from Corral. No fortifications protected the city. No skeletal remains showing signs of violence have been discovered. This civilization apparently existed in peace, a striking anomaly in human history, where cooperation rather than conquest appears to have been the governing principle. The pyramids of Corral were not built from massive stone blocks laboriously fitted together. Instead, they were constructed using shikra bags, woven containers filled with gravel and stone. This technique, while appearing simple, reveals sophisticated understanding of structural engineering. When earthquakes struck the region, and they have, many times, the shikra construction proved remarkably resilient. The bags could absorb seismic energy, distributing impact across their woven surfaces. They could shift and settle without breaking. A structure built from rigid stone blocks might have shattered. These flexible walls endured. The builders of Corral thus demonstrated knowledge of earthquake-resistant construction centuries before such techniques were formally documented. They understood, through practical experience and accumulated wisdom, principles that modern civil engineers would later rediscover through mathematical analysis. They built not through rigid dominance of nature, but through harmony with natural forces. The city served as a trade hub. Artifacts discovered there include shells from the Pacific coast, fish preserved through drying, cotton, minerals from the highland regions, and goods sourced from the Amazon basin. Corral was not an isolated community. It existed at the center of a vast network of exchange, goods moving between different ecological zones, carrying with them ideas, beliefs, and cultural innovations. Musical instruments recovered from the site reveal artistic sophistication, flutes fashioned from bird bones, whistles with carefully calculated pitch. These instruments were not casual creations, but carefully crafted tools that could produce specific sounds. The discovery of multiple musical instruments arranged by type suggests formal organization of music, perhaps ceremonial performances, perhaps educational instruction in musical traditions. Spiral symbols appear on walls and surfaces throughout Corral. These recurring motifs may represent cosmic cycles, energy flows, or abstract concepts we can no longer access. The consistency of their placement suggests intentional decoration, meaningful symbolism rather than random artistic expression. The greatest mystery of Corral is its disappearance. No destruction layers mark the city's end. No evidence of catastrophic fire, earthquake, or conflict. No bodies in the streets. No sign of plague or disease. The inhabitants apparently simply departed, leaving their buildings standing, their structures intact, their city empty. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Soup Valley experienced severe drought in periods following Corral's prosperity. Soil analysis and pollen studies indicate that rainfall became unpredictable. The river that had sustained the city altered its course. Agricultural productivity declined. The foundation of Corral's success, reliable water for irrigation and for sustaining crops, eroded as environmental conditions shifted. A civilization dependent on specific environmental conditions faces an existential choice when those conditions change. Attempt to adapt in place, struggling against degrading circumstances, or migrate to new lands where survival is more feasible. The people of Corral apparently chose migration. They did not fight to the end. They did not succumb to disease or warfare. They made a strategic decision to relocate their families and their lives. But where did they go? Some scholars theorize that they moved southward along the coast or inland toward the highlands. They may have carried their knowledge, their practices, their spiritual traditions with them. If so, they may have contributed to the foundation of later civilizations, the Norte Chico culture that would give rise to subsequent Andean peoples. Corral itself was forgotten. It lay beneath dust and soil, hidden by centuries of neglect, invisible to Spanish conquistadors who sought gold and artifacts. Only in recent decades was it systematically explored, its secrets gradually revealed. The city stands as a monument to human adaptability, a civilization that thrived through cooperation rather than domination, that built in harmony with natural forces, that created beauty even in an inhospitable environment, and that, when circumstances demanded transformation, chose to transform rather than to perish. The fortress in the clouds rising above the sacred valley, where the earth itself seems to transition toward heaven, stands a fortress that embodies contradiction. Ollantaytambo, the name itself carries mystery. Its etymology, disputed by scholars, represents the pinnacle of Inca military architecture. Yet it also suggests something far older, far more enigmatic. The blocks that compose Ollantaytambo's most impressive walls are massive beyond easy comprehension. Some weigh between 50 and 100 tons, equivalent to the weight of 25 elephants. Yet they are fitted together without mortar, without adhesive. Their contact surface is so precise that separation would require instruments of surgical precision. The blocks are not rectangular. Each possesses a unique shape, with multiple faces that intersect at angles calculated to maximize structural stability. When an earthquake strikes, these interlocking stones can shift slightly, absorbing energy, before settling back into place. It is a design principle that modern earthquake engineering has only recently codified through advanced mathematical analysis. The granite and andesite used in construction did not exist at the site itself. Geological surveys have traced the stone to quarries located across the Urubamba River Valley, more than 7 kilometers distant. The river itself represents a formidable barrier. The terrain between quarry and fortress is steep, rocky, and inhospitable to the movement of massive stone blocks. How were these stones transported? The conventional explanation invokes ropes, wooden rollers, and large teams of workers. Yet the mathematics of such a solution strain credibility. Moving the 50-ton block across such terrain would require an estimated 1,500 people pulling in coordinated fashion, maintaining constant tension on ropes of plant fiber, navigating slopes that offer minimal traction. Broken stones discovered along the route from quarry to fortress testify that some blocks did indeed fall during transport. Yet the blocks that arrived at Ollantaytambo bear no impact marks, no signs of improper handling, no irregularities suggesting rough treatment. They appear to have been placed with care and precision, as if positioned by technology capable of minute adjustment and perfect control. The construction technique visible in Ollantaytambo's lowest levels differs markedly from the upper sections. The lower stones display weathering patterns suggesting exposure over longer periods than documented Inca occupation. The fitting technique is even more sophisticated in these lower levels, raising again the question, did the Inca build upon foundations laid by an earlier civilization? Local legends preserve the memory of Ollantaytambo as a sacred place predating Inca rule. Stories speak of ancient priests and rituals, of ceremonial functions that extended far beyond military defense. The Inca, according to these traditions, adapted and expanded a structure they inherited, rather than creating it from foundation upward. The Wall of the Six Monoliths stands as the most iconic feature of Ollantaytambo. 6 stones, each approximately 4 meters tall and weighing more than 60 tons, arranged in precise alignment. The surfaces appear unnaturally smooth, as if softened or melted before being joined together. No tool marks mar the stone face. The seams between blocks are virtually imperceptible. Modern engineers have attempted to explain the stone's appearance as the result of weathering and erosion over centuries. Yet the uniformity of the polished surface, the consistency of the mirror-like finish, and the precision of the angles all suggest that the effect was intentional, achieved during construction rather than accumulating gradually through time. Some researchers have speculated that the Inca possessed knowledge of stone softening techniques. Perhaps they used chemical compounds derived from local plants or minerals. Perhaps they applied heat in controlled ways. Perhaps they understood principles of molecular restructuring that modern science has only recently begun to explore. These remain speculations. No archaeological evidence of tools, processes, or chemical residues has been discovered. Yet the appearance of the stone, the precision of the joints, and the seeming impossibility of achieving such results with documented tools creates a genuine puzzle for researchers. The placement of Ollantaytambo within the landscape reveals sophisticated understanding of astronomy and sacred geography. The fortress aligns with significant celestial events, the rising and setting points of the sun at equinoxes and solstices. The terraces and pathways frame views of astronomical significance. The carved face on a nearby mountainside gazes toward the east, toward the direction of sunrise, representing Viracocha, the creator deity. The Inca regarded Ollantaytambo as more than a fortress. It was a sacred center, a place where the boundaries between human and divine became permeable. Ceremonies performed here were intended to strengthen the relationship between the people and the cosmic forces that governed their existence. The walls were architecture, yes, but they were also prayer, physical expressions of religious devotion rendered in stone. The ancient observatory of water and agriculture in the landscape above the sacred valley, at an altitude that challenges human physiology, lie the concentric circles of Moray. The site appears, from above, like a series of colossal spirals, or like the imprint of some vast organism that once pressed itself into the earth. From ground level, Moray presents itself as a series of sunken terraces, agricultural basins descending into the earth in circular patterns. The deepest depression plunges nearly 30 meters into the landscape, a massive undertaking that required the removal and relocation of enormous quantities of soil and stone. Each terrace was carefully constructed. The angles of descent were calculated to optimize exposure to sunlight. The surface materials were selected with care. The entire system was designed clearly and deliberately to create environmental conditions distinct from the surrounding landscape. Modern researchers have measured the temperature differential across Moray's terraces and discovered something remarkable. The difference in temperature between the uppermost level and the deepest level can exceed 15 degrees Celsius. This is not the result of seasonal variation or weather patterns. It is the intentional consequence of site design. As one descends through Moray, the environment progressively changes. The upper levels experience stronger sun exposure, cooler temperatures, and greater wind velocity. The intermediate levels offer moderate conditions. The lowest levels are warmer, more sheltered from wind, and experience higher humidity. This progression of environmental conditions mirrors, in miniature, the climate variations found across the vast Inca Empire. The empire stretched from coastal deserts through highland plateaus into tropical rainforests. To govern such diverse territory, the Inca needed to understand how different crops performed under different environmental conditions. They needed to know which varieties of potatoes would thrive at high altitude, which strains of maize would produce viable seeds in cooler zones, how to maximize yields while minimizing vulnerability to climatic extremes. Moray provided a solution. Within a single site, researchers could conduct experiments on crop varieties. Planting the same seeds at different terrace levels would show how environmental variables affected growth, reproduction, and eventual yield. Over generations, this systematic observation would allow the identification and cultivation of crop strains specifically adapted to particular conditions. The Inca achieved this without writing, without formal scientific methodology, without instruments of measurement. They achieved it through careful observation, systematic experimentation, and the willingness to invest tremendous labor in gathering knowledge that would benefit future generations. Modern genetic analysis has demonstrated the remarkable diversity of crop varieties cultivated by the Inca. Over 70 varieties of potatoes were developed, each adapted to specific environmental conditions. More than 20 types of maize, quinoa variants, root crops, all optimized through generations of selective breeding and careful environmental observation. Moray was not merely an agricultural testing ground. It was a sacred space where the relationship between humans and the earth was ceremonially enacted. The concentric circles may have represented the sun, the ultimate source of all life. The descending terraces may have symbolized the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth present throughout nature. Some scholars suggest that Moray functioned as a solar observatory. Priests and astronomers could track the movement of the sun across the sky, determining the precise dates of equinoxes and solstices. These dates held profound religious significance and practical importance, indicating when crops should be planted, when harvests should be gathered, when ceremonies should be performed to align human activity with cosmic cycles. What is most remarkable about Moray is that it still functions. Modern experiments have shown that seeds planted at different terrace levels still experience variations in germination rates, growth patterns, and maturity timing. The ancient design remains effective across centuries. The ancient builders understood their environment deeply enough to create something that transcends time, that continues to operate according to their original intentions. The doorway to another realm on the shore of Lake Titicaca, where the Earth's largest high-altitude body of water reflects the Andean sky, a mystery sits carved into stone. Puerta de Hayu Marca, the gateway of the gods, rises nearly 7 meters tall, an architectural impossibility in its own right. The stone face is perfectly smooth. No chisel marks mar its surface. No tool impressions suggest the direction or method of creation. The edges are perfectly perpendicular despite the weight of the formation pressing downward. The entire structure appears to have been carved from a single massive block of reddish granite, or perhaps sculpted as a unified piece. At its center sits a smaller niche, a rectangular opening roughly 2 meters high that resembles the entrance to an ancient temple. But approaching the doorway reveals the crucial detail. There is nothing behind it. The portal opens to solid stone. No passage, no chamber, no revelation. Simply stone confronting stone, surface meeting surface. The locals of the Titicaca region possess an explanation that science struggles to refute. The gateway does not lead to the physical world, they assert. It leads instead to the spiritual realm, to Hayumara, the land of the gods. Only those chosen, only those prepared through proper ritual and understanding, could pass through the opening to reach the other side. The most famous legend attached to the site involves a high priest of the Inca sun temples named Amaru Maru. When the Spanish conquest threatened the empire, this priest fled the invaders, carrying with him a sacred artifact of supreme importance, the golden disk of the sun god, a physical representation of Inti, the supreme deity. The priest made his way to Lake Titicaca and stood before Puerta de Hayu Marca. Performing ancient rituals, he placed the sacred disk into the small hollow visible at the gateway's center, a hollow that remains visible today as if frozen in that moment. A brilliant blue light flooded the landscape. The priest stepped through the doorway and vanished. Whether this account preserves literal truth or metaphorical memory remains unknowable. But the specificity of the legend, its preservation across generations, and its persistence despite modern skepticism, suggest that something significant occurred at this location. The stone itself presents puzzles that conventional archaeology finds difficult to address. The surface appears melted rather than chiseled, as if softened by extreme heat, then allowed to cool and solidify in its present form. The corners maintain perfect right angles despite this apparent melting process. The stone has not flowed or sagged or deformed. It appears to have been carefully controlled, shaped while malleable, then hardened in its final configuration. Some researchers draw comparisons to other megalithic sites throughout the Andean region, places like Pumapunku, where massive stone blocks appear molded rather than carved. If the Inca possessed knowledge of stone softening, whether through heat, chemical compounds, or unknown techniques, then Puerta de Hayu Marca might represent the most refined expression of this capability. But the gateway does not bear typical Inca construction fingerprints. Its monolithic character differs from the Inca preference for fitted blocks. Its apparent age exceeds documented Inca occupation in the region. Some scholars propose that Puerta de Hayu Marca predates the Inca civilization by centuries or millennia, that it represents the work of a civilization now lost to historical memory. Yet no archaeological evidence connects the gateway to any known pre-Inca culture. No pottery lies at its base. No structural remnants suggest a temple or ceremonial complex associated with the site. The gateway stands in isolation, connected to the earth by stone but connected to history by mystery alone. Visitors to the site report unusual sensations. Electronic devices malfunction. Compasses behave erratically. Electromagnetic readings fluctuate in ways that geologists struggle to explain through simple mineral composition. Some people describe tingling sensations, dizziness, or the sense of stepping outside normal time. The locals explain these sensations as the presence of divine energy, the residual power of a gateway between worlds. Scientists seek geological explanations, natural magnetic anomalies, mineral deposits with unusual properties, or simple psychological effects generated by confronting an enigmatic structure. What cannot be disputed is that Porta de Hayu Marca generates powerful responses in those who encounter it. Whether that response is psychological, spiritual, or physical in some measurable sense remains open to interpretation. But the consistency of reported sensations across different individuals and different time periods suggests that the site possesses genuine properties worthy of serious investigation. The Preserved One. The Ice Maiden High on the frozen peak of Mount Ampato, where the thin air barely sustains human life and temperatures plunge far below what human physiology can endure, a body lay preserved for more than 500 years. In 1995, as geothermal activity from the volcanic mountain caused glacial ice to retreat, archaeologists discovered a bundle wrapped in fine textiles. Inside was a person, a young girl no more than 15 years of age, whose flesh remained intact, whose features remained recognizable, whose body seemed almost to slumber rather than to rest in death. She became known as Juanita, the Ice Maiden of Ampato. Her discovery provided an unprecedented window into the life, the death, and the spiritual beliefs of the Inca people at the height of their empire. The preservation was extraordinary. The girl's skin retained a pinkish-brown tone, as if she had merely closed her eyes moments before discovery. Her hair, thick and black, lay across her shoulders. Her fingernails showed no signs of decay. Her facial features were so distinctly preserved that archaeologists could read expression in her face, a calmness, a serenity, suggesting either deep sleep or willing acceptance. The accompanying artifacts revealed her identity and her purpose. Fine clothing woven from alpaca wool, items crafted from gold and silver, elaborate headdresses. The quality and detail of these objects indicated that the girl was of noble lineage, of high social status, of profound importance to the community that would have accompanied her on her final journey. DNA analysis and skeletal examination confirmed what the artifacts suggested. This girl belonged to the royal Inca lineage. She was chosen, selected from among all the noble daughters of the empire, for a purpose both sacred and tragic. She had been selected for Capac Cocha, a ceremony of sacrifice performed during times of transition, during moments when the empire faced fundamental change. When a new emperor ascended to power, when natural disasters threatened the land, when the empire's boundaries required expansion or consolidation. The children chosen for Capac Cocha were not offerings given reluctantly. They were selected as the highest possible honor, messengers chosen to communicate between the living world and the divine realm. The most perfect children, the most beautiful, the most spiritually pure, were deemed worthy of this ultimate service to the empire and to the gods. The journey to Ampato's summit took weeks. The girl traveled from the imperial capital of Cusco, carried in a litter, accompanied by priests and attendants. The path wound upward through increasingly thin air, toward a destination she likely understood but perhaps only abstractly. As she climbed higher, as the air grew thinner and colder, the sensations must have intensified. The world would have felt both more real and more dreamlike as oxygen deprivation began to affect consciousness. Upon reaching the summit, a ceremony was performed. Chicha, a fermented corn beverage, was provided, likely to dull the senses. Coca leaves were chewed, their subtle stimulant properties providing a distraction from fear. The girl would have been positioned in a meditative posture, seated, her body arranged with careful attention to spiritual symbolism. Then, swiftly and apparently without prolonged suffering, a ceremonial club struck her head. Death came instantly. No struggle, no signs of pain in the skeletal remains. The cold of the mountain sealed her almost immediately, the freeze preserving her body in the state of that moment. What haunts researchers is her expression, the peace visible in her frozen features, the absence of fear or anguish, the serenity suggesting acceptance or resignation, or perhaps spiritual preparation so profound that fear had been transcended. For the Inca, this moment represented not a conclusion but a transformation. The girl did not cease to exist. She completed a transition from the physical realm to the spiritual world, where her soul would exist eternally at the apex of the mountain, watching over the people she had served, interceding with the gods on behalf of the empire. The preservation of her body created a unique situation. While most mummies created by human intervention, wrapped and processed through specific techniques, show signs of that intervention, Juanita was preserved entirely through nature. The cold, the lack of oxygen, the absence of bacterial activity, the dry mountain air. These natural conditions created a sterile environment where cellular decay ceased. When her body was brought to lower elevations and the thawing process began, something extraordinary occurred. As her temperature rose slightly, blood began to appear around her nose and lips. Dark red droplets emerged from tissues untouched for centuries. Her internal organs remained intact. Her lungs had not decomposed. The proteins in her muscles and red blood cells had been preserved in a state that should have been impossible. This phenomenon, a 500-year-old body that still bled, struck the scientific community with profound impact. It raised questions about the nature of death, the mechanisms of preservation, and the boundaries between life and death that science thought it understood clearly. Some researchers proposed that the pressure exerted by glacial ice and freezing temperatures had essentially created a cryogenic state. Cellular decay halted so completely that thawing could theoretically reverse it. If true, this suggested that the girl could have potentially been revived if proper medical technology had been available, a thought that both fascinated and disturbed the researchers. Others argued that the girl's death, the blood, and the continued preservation transcended simple scientific explanation. They pointed to her expression, her peaceful aspect, her apparent willingness to step into the role she had been chosen for. Perhaps, they suggested, some essential part of her consciousness remained present in the body, bound by the spiritual power of the place, kept from complete dissolution by forces we do not yet understand. Genetic studies identified her lineage as connected to the royal families of Cusco. Some skeletal characteristics suggested mixed ancestry, highland and coastal origins, indicating that she may have traveled hundreds of kilometers from her birth home to be chosen for this sacred role. When her remains were discovered, the local indigenous people of the region protested strongly. To them, moving the Ice Maiden from the mountain violated sacred principle. The girl's purpose, as they understood it, was to remain at the summit, to serve as a guardian spirit, to watch over the land and intercede with the mountain gods for the well-being of the people. The removal of her body from the mountain, in their view, severed that protective presence. It broke a relationship that had endured for 5 centuries. It violated the express intent of the original ceremony that had placed her there. Today, Juanita resides in a special freezing chamber at a museum in Arequipa, Peru. The chamber maintains the temperature and conditions necessary to preserve her body. Visitors can observe her from a distance, looking upon a face that has been frozen in time, a person whose death occurred half a millennium ago yet whose body appears untouched by the passage of years. Many who have stood before her frozen form report powerful experiences. They describe feeling the presence of a consciousness still attached to the body. They sense her watching them even though her eyes remain closed. Some describe feeling sadness, others feeling gratitude, still others experiencing a connection they struggle to articulate in words. Photographs of the Ice Maiden often reveal a faint bluish glow surrounding her body, particularly visible near her head and chest. Scientists attribute this to the interaction of light with ice, to reflections and refractions from the special preservation chamber. But to those who encounter her presence, the glow appears to be something else, the visible manifestation of her spiritual essence, a luminescence that transcends mere physics. Whatever the truth of such interpretations, one fact remains undisputed. Juanita represents one of the most remarkable windows into the life, beliefs, and practices of the Inca civilization. Through her preserved body, we can read the spiritual convictions that governed their society, the value they placed on sacred sacrifice, and their understanding of death, not as ending but as transformation. The Silent Witness, the city of Corral's mysteries, the Sup Valley north of Lima, contains within its embrace a story that challenges conventional understanding of human civilization's development. Corral emerged as a complex urban center during the 26th century before the Common Era, roughly contemporary with Egypt's Old Kingdom, with Sumer's city-states, with the earliest monumental architecture anywhere on Earth. Yet Corral differs profoundly from its Old World counterparts. While Egyptian civilization was governed by pharaohs and left behind written records, hieroglyphic inscriptions on monuments and papyrus scrolls, Corral appears to have flourished without writing. No inscriptions have been discovered despite decades of systematic excavation. No symbols that clearly represent language. No evidence of a writing system, either developed or developing. This absence stands as a genuine enigma. How can a civilization achieve such complexity? Urban organization, monumental construction, artistic production, trade networks, without written language? How can knowledge be transmitted across generations without written recording? How can administrative functions be conducted without written documentation? One possible answer lies in the nature of the civilization itself. Perhaps writing was simply not necessary for Corral's specific context. Perhaps the relative geographical isolation of the site, the sufficient size of the population to maintain oral traditions, and the specific functions served by the community all combined to make writing superfluous. Yet this explanation satisfies neither the historical precedent nor the logical expectation. In nearly every known civilization, the development of writing accompanies the growth of urban complexity. The absence of writing at Corral thus represents a genuine anomaly, a civilization that defies the expected correlation between complexity and written communication. The pottery recovered from Corral shows no inscriptions, no symbols, no decorative patterns that might represent a proto-writing system. The stone tools, though finely crafted, bear no markings. The architecture, though sophisticated, contains no carved inscriptions indicating purpose or dedication. The musical instruments recovered from Corral offer intriguing evidence of artistic and cultural sophistication. Flutes fashioned from bird bones, whistles, horns, pipes. These were not crude instruments, but carefully crafted tools designed to produce specific tones and combinations of sound. The presence of multiple musical instruments, carefully separated and stored, suggests formal organization of music. Perhaps ritual performances. Perhaps educational transmission of musical traditions to younger generations. The acoustic properties of the instruments suggest that the musicians of Corral possessed understanding of how sound travels, how different tones combine, how resonance and harmony function. The irrigation systems at Corral reveal hydraulic engineering of remarkable sophistication. Water drawn from the Sup River was channeled through a series of canals that moved the precious liquid to where it could nourish crops and sustain the population. The precision of these channels, the angles of descent, the distribution points, all suggest careful planning and understanding of water's properties. In a landscape where water is the most precious resource, where rainfall is minimal and undependable, the control and management of water becomes central to survival. The people of Corral invested tremendous effort in creating systems that would ensure reliable access to water. They understood, through generations of observation and adaptation, how to live in concert with their environment. The architecture of Corral follows principles distinct from later Andean construction. The pyramids, built using shikra bags filled with gravel and stone, reveal a construction philosophy emphasizing flexibility and resilience rather than rigid strength. These structures could endure earthquakes by absorbing and distributing seismic energy rather than resisting it. This represents a fundamental insight into structural engineering that modern civilization took centuries to develop. The people of Corral understood it through practical experience, through systematic observation, through the willingness to adapt their techniques based on what worked and what failed. The city functioned as a commercial hub, connecting diverse ecological zones. Evidence of trade includes shells from the Pacific coast, preserved fish, cotton, minerals from the highlands, goods from the Amazon region. This trade was not casual or sporadic, but systematic and regular. People from Caral traveled to distant locations and returned with goods. People from distant locations came to Caral and exchanged their products for goods, available only in this specific location. What's remarkable about this trade is its apparent peacefulness. No weapons are evident in the archaeological record, no fortifications protected Caral, no skeletal evidence of violence exists. The community apparently engaged in trade and exchange without need for military defense or internal violence control. This raises questions about the nature of human society. In much of recorded history, warfare and violence appear endemic. Communities fortify themselves, develop weapons, engage in conflict for resources or territory. Yet Caral appears to have maintained complex social organization without violence as a governing principle. How was this achieved? What social structures, what cultural values, what spiritual beliefs allowed a community to organize itself without resorting to coercion or force? The archaeological record preserves no evidence of slavery or forced labor. The structures appear to have been built through voluntary effort, people choosing to contribute their labor toward shared community goals. The greatest puzzle of Caral is not what it was, but what happened to it. At some point, the city was abandoned. The inhabitants departed, leaving their structures intact, their homes empty, their city silent. No destruction layer marks a catastrophic ending. No bodies lie in the streets. No evidence of plague or epidemic. No signs of warfare. The theory most supported by environmental evidence points to climate change. The Sup Valley experienced periods of severe drought. Soil and pollen analysis reveals that rainfall became increasingly irregular. The river that had sustained the city altered its course. Without reliable water, agricultural production failed. Without agriculture, the food supply that sustained the population disappeared. The inhabitants apparently made a strategic decision. Rather than attempting to survive in increasingly hostile circumstances, they relocated. They moved to other locations where water was more abundant, where agriculture was more reliable. In leaving, they did not destroy their city, they simply abandoned it, allowing nature to reclaim what human effort had built. Over centuries, dust accumulated. Vegetation grew. The city became hidden beneath sand and soil. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in South America seeking wealth and conquest, they never noticed the buried ruins. Caral remained lost until the 20th century, when archaeologists recognized what local residents had preserved: the memory of something ancient, something significant, something worthy of investigation. Today, Caral stands as a monument to human adaptability, to the possibility of complex civilization without violence, and to the mysteries that remain hidden beneath the earth, waiting for future generations to uncover and understand them. The sacred mathematics of alignment throughout the Andean region, a remarkable phenomenon, appears repeatedly: the alignment of structures with celestial events. The rising and setting points of the sun at solstices and equinoxes, the appearances of significant constellations, the movements of the moon through its cycles. This is not accidental. The precision of these alignments, the consistency with which they appear at different sites, and the sophistication of the astronomical knowledge required to achieve them all, point to deliberate intent. The Inca, and possibly earlier Andean civilizations, possessed detailed knowledge of celestial mechanics. They tracked the positions of stars with sufficient accuracy to predict their movements across decades and centuries. They understood the relationship between the sun's apparent movement and the passage of seasons, critical knowledge for agricultural societies dependent on knowing when to plant and when to harvest. How was this knowledge acquired and maintained without telescopes, without written records, without the instruments of modern astronomy? Through generations of careful observation. Through the recordation of patterns in visual memory, and perhaps in quipu, the knotted cord recording systems used by the Inca for numerical and possibly historical information. Night after night, month after month, year after year, observers would note the position of stars, the movement of planets, the changing position of the sun. Over generations, patterns would emerge, cycles would become visible, predictions would become possible. This astronomical knowledge was then encoded into physical structures. Temples and walls were oriented towards significant celestial points. Sightlines within buildings aligned with astronomical phenomena. Sacred spaces were positioned to channel sunlight at specific times of year. In doing so, the builders created architecture that functioned as astronomical apparatus. The buildings themselves became tools for tracking and predicting celestial events. Walking through these structures at different times of year would reveal different patterns of light and shadow, sacred imagery created through the interplay of architecture and astronomy. What distinguishes Andean astronomy from other ancient astronomical traditions is the integration of celestial knowledge with practical concerns and spiritual beliefs. The movements of the sun were tracked not as abstract intellectual exercise, but as information necessary for agricultural survival. The positions of stars were observed not as random points of light, but as representations of deities and cosmic forces. The Inca viewed the universe as animated by spiritual power. Every celestial object, every meteorological phenomenon, every geological feature possessed agency and intent. The sun was not simply a source of heat and light, but the supreme deity, Inti, the giver of life, the source of divine authority, the cosmic force that governed all existence. To align human structures with celestial events was thus to align human society with divine order. It was to synchronize human activity with cosmic cycles. It was to demonstrate understanding of and respect for the forces that governed existence. The continuing mysteries. The archaeological sites of the Andean region continue to yield new discoveries and raise new questions. Modern technology has revealed details invisible to earlier generations of researchers. Satellite imagery has identified previously unknown figures in the Nazca Desert. Three-dimensional modeling has allowed architectural analysis impossible through traditional methods. DNA analysis has revealed genetic relationships and migration patterns. Yet with each discovery, with each new analysis, the fundamental mysteries persist. How could ancient peoples achieve such precision without modern instruments? How could they move stones so massive without documented technologies? How could they acquire such sophisticated astronomical and engineering knowledge? How could civilizations flourish and then vanish, leaving behind questions but not answers? The temptation exists to invoke explanations beyond conventional archaeology, to propose lost advanced technologies, to suggest extraterrestrial intervention, to invoke spiritual explanations that transcend material causation. Yet the evidence that survives argues instead for something perhaps more remarkable: the genuine ingenuity of ancient peoples. Their capacity to observe nature carefully, to learn from experience, to transmit knowledge across generations, to create beauty and meaning through patient effort, to build monuments that would outlast their creators, speaking across centuries to people they would never meet. The mysteries of the Andes are not mysteries of impossibility but mysteries of method. We do not possess clear understanding of how specific achievements were accomplished, but the achievements themselves are not impossible, merely difficult, requiring dedication, organization, and the kind of sustained effort that modern civilization rarely demands of itself. In standing before these monuments, in attempting to understand the minds and hands that created them, we encounter something profound. Not superhuman knowledge, but profoundly human capability. Not divine intervention, but human ingenuity. Not proof of lost advanced civilizations, but demonstration of what humans can accomplish when they commit themselves to a purpose they deem sacred. The stones speak. We have simply not yet learned their language. The terraces that reach toward heaven, at elevations that test the limits of human physiology, The Inca engineers created agricultural terraces that seemed to defy gravity itself. These were not simple modifications to the landscape, but sophisticated engineering systems designed to transform steep mountain slopes into productive farmland. The terraces follow the contours of the mountains, descending like enormous stairways. Each level was meticulously constructed, with careful attention to drainage, water distribution, and soil composition. The stone walls that form the terraces are built to last millennia, their fitted blocks stable enough to endure the freeze-thaw cycles of high mountain winters. What distinguishes these terraces from simple agricultural features is their integration with broader environmental management. Water sources located high on the mountains were carefully directed through channels that fed the terraces in sequence. Each terrace received water when needed, directing excess water downslope to terraces below. The system was self-regulating, creating a sustainable agricultural operation that could feed populations despite harsh environmental conditions. The slope angles, the height of individual terraces, the spacing between levels, all were calibrated through generations of observation and refinement. A terrace built at the wrong angle might allow water to flow too quickly, eroding the soil. A terrace too tall might become unstable during seismic activity. The Inca optimized every parameter through practical experience. Modern agricultural engineers studying these terraces have concluded that they remain among the most efficient systems ever created for mountain agriculture. Despite their age, despite the absence of modern maintenance equipment, these terraces continue to function. Water still flows where intended. Soil remains stable. Crops still grow where their builders intended them to flourish. This speaks to a fundamental difference between ancient and modern engineering philosophy. Modern engineers often prioritize optimization for single parameters: maximum efficiency, maximum yield, minimum cost. The Inca prioritized resilience and longevity. They built structures that could endure for centuries, that could adapt to changing conditions, that could continue functioning even if individual components failed. The sacred geometry of hidden messages. The placement of structures across the Andean landscape reveals patterns that cannot be coincidental. When sites are mapped and examined for alignment relationships, complex geometries emerge. Lines of sight connecting different locations. Distances between sites following mathematical ratios. Orientations that correspond to significant astronomical points. Some researchers have proposed that the entire Sacred Valley was designed as a vast mandala, a geometric representation of cosmic order carved into the landscape itself. The various temples, fortresses, and ceremonial sites, when connected by imaginary lines, form patterns that repeat principles found in mystical traditions worldwide. Whether these patterns represent intentional design or patterns imposed by modern researchers attempting to find meaning is debatable. Yet the consistency with which such alignments appear, and the precision with which ancient builders oriented their structures toward celestial points, suggests that some form of geographic and cosmic planning governed the placement of major sites. The Inca and potentially earlier civilizations may have viewed the entire landscape as a sacred text. Different locations represented different concepts. The high mountains represented the realm of the gods. The valleys represented the human world. Rivers represented the flow of time and destiny. In navigating this landscape, in moving from one sacred site to another, people were reading a cosmological map written in stone and earth. The voices carried in wind and stone. One final mystery connects all the others: the mystery of cultural memory. How is it possible that civilizations of such sophistication could vanish from historical record, leaving behind only monuments and artifacts, no written accounts of their achievements? The Spanish conquistadors, when they arrived in South America, encountered the Inca Empire at the height of its power. Yet they found no records of Nazca, no references to Corral, no documentation of the earlier civilizations that had shaped the Andean landscape. The Inca themselves, it appears, had lost memory of those who came before them. This suggests that knowledge, accumulated over generations, can be lost, that civilizations can forget their own history, that the memory of achievement, no matter how monumental, can be erased by time and circumstance. The stone structures endured where knowledge did not. The buildings outlasted the people who understood their purpose. The astronomical alignments continued to mark celestial events long after the meaning of those events had been forgotten. Yet the structures continue to speak. To anyone who approaches them with attention and respect, the monuments communicate something fundamental about human capability, about the power of dedication, about the possibility of creating meaning that transcends individual lifetimes. The Nazca lines continue to draw visitors who gaze upon them from the air, attempting to understand the minds that conceived them. Corral's pyramids continue to stand in the Sup Valley, visible to anyone who ventures to that remote location. Ollantaytambo continues to demonstrate architectural mastery that challenges contemporary understanding. Machu Picchu continues to inspire awe in all who encounter its perfect integration of human construction and natural environment. These monuments are messages across time. Not messages written in words, but messages conveyed through form, through precision, through the visible evidence of human intention and effort. The eternal question standing in the Andean landscape, surrounded by monuments that challenge contemporary understanding, a fundamental question emerges. What did the builders know that we have forgotten? Perhaps they understood principles of stoneworking we have lost. Perhaps they possessed astronomical knowledge we are only now rediscovering. Perhaps they viewed the relationship between humans and environment, between spiritual and material existence, between individual and community, in ways that modern civilization would benefit from recovering. Or perhaps the answer is simpler and more profound. Perhaps they simply understood that dedicating effort to creating something beautiful and meaningful, something that would outlast any individual life, something that would continue to inspire and challenge future generations. Perhaps they understood this as the highest calling available to human existence. The stones of the Andes continue to wait, continue to endure, continue to pose their silent questions to anyone who takes the time to listen. In a world increasingly dominated by noise and distraction, by constant stimulation and rapid change, these ancient monuments offer something rare, the opportunity to stand in presence of human intention, to contemplate the possibilities of what humans can achieve when they commit themselves fully to a purpose they deem sacred. The mysteries remain, the questions persist, and in that persistence lies perhaps the greatest teaching of all, that the journey of understanding, the process of asking questions and seeking answers, matters more than any final resolution. The mountains continue to rise, the stones continue to endure, and humanity continues its eternal conversation with the past, seeking wisdom that transcends time, seeking truth, written in the very substance of the earth itself.